To 5 seconds. Colburn shoots the flush and score! The Flyers tie it with 2.8 seconds remaining. Excellent for them. So the Penguins have had leads of 2-0, 3-1. Now Couturier ties it at 5. Sean Couturier with his second goal of the night.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 108, sponsored by FlyersNittyGritty.com. You've heard from Chef and I, and it looks like Dan Silver may or may not be able to make it with us tonight. But fortunately, we have our esteemed guest with us right now. He's from Center Ice Philly, Off the Post Radio, contributor to Full Press and HockeyBuzz.com. Let's welcome back Anthony Mingioni.
How you doing, guys?
How you doing? Great to have you back. So, I don't want to bury the lead, but I am going to talk, obviously, about what the Flyers have done over the last several games. I mean, the last time we got together on our show, we were wrapping up about how happy we were, and they were going through the Sabres, back-to-back shutouts, and then we run into the Penguins. We have a game that made everybody disgusted. Then we have the big comeback. Is this a pivot point in the season? And then they just ran out of gas in that third game. And then they came back with somewhat of a disappointing effort. Anthony, it just seems like there seems to be a consensus that maybe the Flyers aren't complete as a team and need to make certain changes. And I just wanted to get your perspective, because you're very objective on your podcast and in your writings.
So I try to be as much as possible, and but certainly in this circumstance, I do have to keep everything in mind with regards to the recent. It's just been, as we all know, it's just been a wild season in terms of how things have set up, the compression of the schedule. You know, you go a long stretch where you don't play, and players are not even allowed to really practice or anything along those lines, and then you get this sudden compressed stretch of 6 games in 9 nights. And I remember the beginning, and when Alain Vigneault was talking about it, and you could see he sort of got that 1,000-yard stare of, like, I don't think he had ever remembered a stretch of a team having to play at least at the NHL of 6 games in 9 nights. So you knew that, how they were going to try to deploy their team. You knew that there was going to be, personnel changes. In some cases, it might not even be performance-based of a bad performance, although in the case of, Phil Myers had a little bit of a rough stretch and did sit, but then got back into the lineup. Robert Haig, who Alain Vigneault believes is playing particularly well, felt like he wanted to sit him down last night. and play and try to bring in Eric Gustafson, who had sat down for four consecutive games. And that one you could probably say obviously was performance related in this circumstance. They weren't happy with his, we all know obviously Gustafson's game at this point. It's well wrote that, he's obviously got an offensive bend to his game, and his lapses in defensive coverage can be, particularly concerning unless he's playing again as long as he's playing on the third pair and having limited ice time. I think in short dosages he's fine, but anything that's more extended than that is always going to be a concern. So I do have to take all this in mind. I observed at the end of last night's first period, I said, the Flyers came out with better jump than I expected them to, considering this was their 6th of 9 nights. But I asked the question of, can they maintain it? What's going to happen in the second period when that adrenaline rush of being in front of the fans sort of tamps out, and the tank, how much do they really have left in the tank? And as we saw in the early part of that second period, while they had some opportunities, their legs weren't moving quite at the speed they were early on. And the Caps, who looked completely, flat on their skates in the first period, I kind of wondered whether or not Peter Laviolette gave them one of those from the old video series, the as casual as it gets speech. And the Caps seemingly really kicked it into gear in the second period. But the Flyers did have opportunities in this game. There were at least 2 to 3 opportunities prior to Ovechkin's tying goal where they could have taken a pretty substantial lead. They had the 2-on-0 that was missed. And then, of course, they had a 3-on-2 down low. The Caps were a little bit loose defensively at times. It's just the Flyers were unable to really cash in on the opportunities that they had. And against a team with the firepower that Washington had, you can only keep them off the board and keep them off for only so long. And last night, by the time we got into the third period, I thought 5-on-5, they weren't terrible. They were, I think, doing the best they could with the energy level that they had. But obviously, as we know, the special teams has certainly become a concern for this team, and certainly it reared its head, I think, in this game especially, where the early PK looked okay in the first period. It looked active. And then after that, they looked fairly flat, and the Caps were starting to get a lot of dangerous opportunities. So it's a tough stretch. Again, the Flyers are now 5-5, basically 5-4-1 in the last 10. It's a tough stretch for them. 5-5-2 in the last, I think, 12 games overall. So they're technically sub 5. If you're going to count the OT losses, they've been sub 500 in their last 12. It's a weird animal right now. They're a weird animal in that there's things I'm watching that I do like, and then there's other things that are just really getting them, butting them in the rear end at the worst possible time.
Yeah. It is kind of a crazy result that we're getting, and it was really interesting that Bill Meltzer put out a tweet earlier about how the first 10 games they were 7-2-1. And the numbers were kind of backward. They were outscoring their mistakes. 3.5 goals a game for, 3 against. But then you look at their power play was 25%, and the penalty kill was 75%. And you look at the face-offs. But then you look at they were getting outshot by a wide margin. Then you go to the last 12 games. They're getting outscored by a small margin, and that's the 5-5-2 span you were referring to. Mm-hmm. And then it really highlights the special teams in terms of going from, 25 to 12.8% on the power play. And then the penalty kill went from 75.7 to 68.6. Even though now they're out shooting the opposition, it's like, who is this team almost 40% of the way through the season?
It's a strange, again, and I think for a lot of teams right now, unless you're at the upper echelon, that the teams are still sort of trying to find their way at this point. And again, when you look at Philadelphia right now, they've had some good stretches, but they've also had some really ugly games as well this year. And again, some of that is due to, and again, you don't want to necessarily peg excuses in this circumstance, but there is this sort of weird sort of cadence to this season that has been sort of difficult for them, and they have to kind of ride this through. Now, again, they get Buffalo tomorrow, and then they're back again with the Capitals for 2 in a row. So, they have to, now they're really kind of locked in a race here with Pittsburgh having 2 games in hand on them, but the Penguins are playing much better now than they did early in the season. So, they really have to, look at the situation. And as Sean Couturier said in the post-game press conference, I mean, he's referring primarily to the power play, but I'd also say overall for them, when they have their when they were as opportunistic as they were early in the season in the opening 10, it was one of those things where, every time they had an opportunity that came in, it seemed like, despite, the other team really bending them back into their own end, they were taking advantage of their situation. And now the process, I think, is in some cases certainly better, I think, at 5-on-5. I think they've been better. I think the forecheck has certainly been way more consistent in recent weeks. But again, things just come around and seem to bite them in the rear end when that happens. And it's a tough thing. And Ivan Provorov, even though, again, they're referring to the power play, but I think in many ways they're referring to where they are as a team. They're trying to figure it out. And whether or not that'll be done by, shaking up the mix, there's a process to it that I think we do have to kind of let things play things forward a little bit here before necessarily we start talking about trades. But we're not that far away to the point where that conversation does have to occur. So these are some of the things, obviously. And again, for me, when I look at this team, I do become obviously concerned about it. Even though they have a number of defensemen, I do feel like that part of the picture is incomplete in terms of their blue line. And, that's one area that I'm certainly looking at as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline.
Yeah, absolutely. Chef?
Since you brought up the stretch there, or the conditioning might be a question. You look back at the team; it's essentially the same team minus a couple guys here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Majorly being Matt Niskanen, but they had a stretch where they excelled at the end before the shutdown, and then when they came back, they looked pretty good first couple rounds till they hit Montreal, and then things started to slide. Is there a question of the conditioning or of this team that they kind of seem to fizzle out? They're fizzling out late in games now, or is it going to be? Is it COVID related since half the team had COVID? I'm not looking for excuses. I'm just looking for something realistic.
I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, the cadence of the season is a strange one this year. There's little question about that. I think there is obviously some concerns about I think the conditioning is part in this case is COVID related. I don't think that this was a case where the team, again, you're starting the season later with a compressed schedule, as mentioned. But again, the players are not going to necessarily make excuses for that. I mean, they had an off season. It was a strange off season, certainly, normally during a time when they would normally be playing, but everybody's off kilter in that circumstance. And you can't necessarily use that as an excuse when everybody else has to face the exact same scenarios, minus, of course, the COVID situation. So I'm going to look at it and say this is that, again, the bubble is, again, also was a very unique situation. And those first 3 bubble games where everybody got excited, you have to kind of remember you have to always obviously remember the fact that you didn't necessarily get those other teams at the highest level of intensity. They were kind of working themselves into it. And then when you went at it against Montreal had already been through, a pseudo playoff series, and were playing with a pretty good rhythm. So each situation has its own sort of unique scenario. But again, you do have to come back and say they struggled. They won their series against Montreal, but they struggled to get there. And then they played a similar opponent with the Islanders and stayed with them, but ultimately got grinded down by how the Islanders played. And that's something that they have to prepare themselves for, obviously, this season as well. That the other teams know, that you are supposed to be one of the upper echelon teams in the league, and you're going to get a better shot from them.
Yeah, as Isaiah had said earlier, and you would allude to too, with the Flyers missing something on defense. Isaiah had said that a couple of times. He felt like they needed that that not necessarily the fighter, the goon type of person, but somebody that had a little edge to the game, a little scrappiness. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that's one of the pieces that you may be referring to?
This is the area, I think, where, again, when you get into some of the elements of what they lost with Matt Niskanen. Now, again, Niskanen did not have a great stretch in the bubble. We all know that. But to a man, the Flyers, many of those Flyer players on that blue line, extolled, what Niskanen brought to their blue line in terms of, his attention to detail, his overall. And we say an edge, we're looking at someone who is kind of mostly, you would say, has been through the wars and is somewhat unflappable, has seen a lot of different situations. Now, again, trying to find that defenseman at the deadline who has all of those characteristics is obviously going to be difficult. But that being said, am I looking to add to the top four a defenseman who can, obviously, you said you don't want, obviously, a goon defenseman. I certainly wouldn't want to see Philadelphia going after, let's say, I'm not a huge Eric Goodbranson guy. But there are a lot of people who extol some of his leadership. But I just feel like Flyers need better than that in their top four to really kind of help that blue line click to the level it was going into mid-March of last season when they were on a pretty good roll. So yeah, to answer your question, I would say you want a defenseman who's got some edge, but you want a guy who can play and match the skill level of an Ivan Provorov, of a Travis Sanheim and Phil Myers, someone you could put in there and say it clicks. Maybe not perfectly, completely perfectly, but is an upgrade on what you have currently converted right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And he has to be able to outlet the puck. He can't be bank the puck off the glass back to the opposition. We have that.
And you need support. At the end of the day, you need levels. You need, second level support for, if you have a Provorov. Again, one of the things that I do have to kind of keep in mind is I'm watching him paired with Shane Gostisbehere, and Ghost has had some good stretches here, and he's also had his moments as well where he struggles, which we know at this point now that's kind of rote when it comes to Shane, is that you take the good with you know what you're going to be getting, and you take, the good when it comes, with his skills and his gifts, it works well. But then with a guy like Ivan, I think Ivan likes to try to jump into the play a little bit more. And I think he may be sometimes a little bit reticent with Shane to always, he's almost the guy who wants to be sort of the cover at the second level for when Shane kind of pinches it a bit more. Whereas I think if you have another defenseman in here that you maybe bring in along those lines, that it might work better in terms of things for Ivan in that circumstance.
Gotcha. And with that, we are proud to bring in Dan Silver. Glad you can make it, Dan.
Hey guys, Anthony, what's going on?
Hey Dan, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, my the boss called and got to take those calls. So he's the one who signs the paychecks. But
I know that.
That's right.
But yeah, glad to be on. And I'm guessing we've been talking about the Flyers so far. But,
all right, you're close. You're getting closer.
Yeah, I mean, my mood is frustration at this point, and just get a make a move. They got to make a move. To me, we've been waiting a long time with this franchise, and as currently constructed, I don't really see this team making the playoffs right now as currently constructed. Certainly not making a deep cup run. So I think that they've got to, you got to make a move. They have so many prospects. They have, pretty much all their draft picks left. I'd be trying to get something done, and I would overpay for it at this point.
I mean, I'm inclined, again, when it comes to the need for this team right now, certainly I think we've gotten to the point here, especially when you have a window remaining, I think with the current veterans on the team, the Claude Giroux and the Jake Voracek, that you do need to augment this I think you do need to augment this roster in some form. Obviously, the target area in this circumstance, in my mind, as Isaiah and Chef and I were talking about, is I think blue line, I think, is probably in all circumstances is the area that you want to target. And again, you will at the end of the day, with some of the names that have been bandied about, you are going to have to give up something in order to make that happen. And I think we all know the names at this point. Obviously, the name of Matthias Ekholm has come up, obviously more than enough times. And again, you have to remember, if he is the top guy on the market, you are going to be facing the fact that when and if that trade occurs, that you're going to be giving up something of substance and potentially multiple items of substance in order to make that deal happen. That being said, do I feel an Ekholm would really upgrade the Flyers' blue line? The answer is yes. Even though he's not a right shot, so he's not a perfect match for for what you lost with Niskanen. But in many ways, you get improvements in overall the overall physical nature of Ekholm in his end. But also he has pretty good. He plays a pretty smart cerebral game. For those who've seen him in Nashville, it's often been sort of an underrated part of that blue line for a long time. But for anybody who's watched him, they know he's been a key core guy for them. Tough guy in terms of just like a guy that, if you're looking to keep the porch in front of your goaltenders clear, but also the board work, as well as his ability, I think, to support, a guy like Ivan Provorov at the second level, while Ivan has the ability to kind of loosen things up a little bit for himself to be able maybe to feel that he could, take some chances going in the other end, because Ekholm, whenever he's been matched, obviously, with a high-skilled defenseman in Nashville, the numbers bear out. He's been an outstanding partner. So if you're asking me, obviously, in the circumstance, would he be my number one target? Absolutely. I think almost immediately that the Flyers' first-round pick will come into play because they're going to be competing with other teams. I do believe that would be probably the entry fee to just start the conversation. And then obviously you're going to have to go from there in terms of, okay, what are you going to be willing to move off, either prospect-wise, roster-wise, in addition to draft capital. And again, there's certain levels that I'm certainly willing to go to if I'm sitting in the GM chair as Chuck Fletcher when it comes to that area, because again, it's an absolute need for them.
Yeah, and Dan, I want you to keep with the momentum, because I heard your On Brotherly pod over the weekend, and I was in total agreement of where we're at with this team, and to take this to another level, looking at what the Flyers' problems are. Before you got on, we were talking about the power plays hurting and the PKs hurting, and it kind of dovetails with what you were talking about and what you discussed on Twitter.
Yeah, there's no answers. You saw Ivan Provorov's answer to how do you fix the power play? I don't know. Okay, well, that's great. Well, we need a little bit more from the coaches and the players than I don't know, I think. And if that's actually where we are, then it's probably a pretty big problem. I've been more optimistic than almost anyone about this team. I bet a substantial amount of money on them to win the Stanley Cup this year. I was very confident. I thought this was kind of the sweet spot, because you've got Carter Hart in his last year before he's going to get a payday. You've basically got your two goalies making, $2.2 million combined, which is a huge bargain. And you've got Joel Farabee making $800,000. It just, to me, this year seemed like the sweet spot, because you were going to have Phil Myers and Travis Sanheim hopefully taking big steps forward. We're getting the big step forward from Farabee, but we're not from guys like Nolan Patrick, Travis Konechny. Konechny's been okay, but it just kind of hit me over the last few weeks. I think we were kind of hoping that this team was getting buried from an underlying metrics perspective to open the season. They were winning games, though. So the question was it just luck? Great goaltending, the reason that we were winning these games? Or was there, something that the underlying metrics don't show? Well, right now it looks like they're lucky to begin the season. Sort of like they were probably to win a lot of the playoff games last year. There were kind of two schools of thought. You could look at how they finished the regular season, the second half of the regular season last year. They were one of the best teams in the league. Or you could look at how they were kind of dominated in the playoffs from a shots perspective and from a play perspective. And I came into the season trying to be optimistic and saying, you know what, let's say that team for the second half of last year's regular season was the real team, and that's what we're going to get this year. Unfortunately, what we're getting is the team that was dominated in the playoffs, and it's actually been worse than that. So they have to make a decision. Like if they think that they can win a Stanley Cup with Giroux and JVR and Voracek and Couturier as the core, you got to make a trade, and you got to make an overpayment, and you got to take a risk. I put a trade out there last week going after Ekholm and Philip Forsberg. And maybe it was outlandish, but, my proposal, if I remember correctly, was Voracek, because you got to give salary. Voracek, Nolan Patrick, a first-round pick, Egor Zamula, Tanner Lazinski, and Wade Allison. Basically, the deal was you got to give a big salary piece back in Voracek, who Nashville won't even want. But to get him to take him, you're going to have to give a lot up, which means a big prospect in Egor Zamula. I think they might want a defense prospect. And Nolan Patrick, who's a guy that maybe they see some value in from the NHL roster, and then give some more prospects. But it basically comes down to, they've got to decide what they want to do with this team. Because if you're going to try and win a cup with this core and the young guys and this sweet spot, you're going to have to make a big move. Maybe they decide that, the problem is the salary cap at this point isn't doing anyone any favors. So it's very difficult. But look, this is why Chuck Fletcher was brought in. Like, these moments are why this GM was brought in. I don't want excuses that there's a lot of teams out there trying to trade for Matthias Ekholm. Yeah, no, obviously that's I was about to curse there, Isaiah, but I didn't want to get bleeped again by you. But
there's no shame in getting bleeped.
Okay. Well, yeah, no. There's a lot of teams that want Matthias Ekholm. That's why we have a GM. Outbid the other GMs. Make something happen. So, like you guys know, I'm always extremely optimistic. At this point, they need to do something. That's the bottom line.
And again, I would say in that circumstance, again, what trying for a swing for the fences trade, I can tell you right now in terms of that kind of proposal, in terms of Nashville, you could you'd subtract Voracek out of that deal because they're not going to take Voracek. They're not. They're going to I don't see that happening. If I'm Poyle, and I'm going to be giving up Felix Forsberg, I'm going to ask for Travis Konechny and probably something else in that deal as well. Might be Morgan Frost as well. That might be included. Might be quite a few players in that circumstance. It goes a little bit higher. I don't get the impression though that the Flyers are necessary. That I think they look at it as, yes, they do. The biggest thing that they need right now is improvement on the blue line, specifically with those kind of targets. If it's not Ekholm, then maybe you look at a David Savard with Columbus is another possibility there, and maybe even more of a fit in the fact that he's a right shot defenseman and has a similar level of not quite on the level. I don't think he quite on the same level of physicality as Ekholm, but he's pretty close in that circumstance, pretty cerebral. But again, another circumstance where Nashville, knowing that they're going to end up playing you in division again soon, but again, he's going to be a UFA regardless.
Yeah.
Again, but they absolutely in this circumstance need to make an upgrade. The degree of the upgrade is obviously going to be the question of what the other team is going to necessarily want in return and how those pieces fit. I don't see them going quite to that level of a massive mega deal involving those players, but I do think one or the other certainly could be involved. But I think defense is the area. If you're asking me to prognosticate the deadline, I think Philadelphia probably say they make the move for Ekholm and decide, and Nashville has interest in Nolan Patrick. So then if Patrick's included in that deal for Ekholm, sure, I would probably do that deal pretty quickly. And then what happens is Philadelphia probably goes and tries to swing a deal for a veteran bottom sixer who has maybe a little bit of experience playing at the pivot to give you at least to fill in that spot in the lineup who might be an expiring contract like last year. That's how I sort of see the deadline potentially playing out for Philadelphia if they make moves. They make a swing at a defenseman, try to shore up that top four, and then if they're moving off a Patrick or somebody else from the roster, then adding a forward, then preferably a veteran who's been in some battles and can help them, especially from the forecheck. I think their forechecking has certainly been better of late, but certainly better at the beginning of the season. But it's just been a weird scenario. And it's just, to answer Dan's situation from earlier, they were lucky, opportunistic. I guess there's a lot of different ways that you could potentially throw out. We knew, looking at some of those numbers at the beginning of the season, that wasn't necessarily going to be sustainable over a long stretch of the season. But they took advantage of it. And now the process at 5-on-5, I think, has been a bit better. But now the special teams has gone through the floor. And it's just an up and down situation for this team right now where they're trying to get things together. I'm not in a sky is falling mode right now. But there's definitely games and opportunities that were available for this team to snap up when they had the chance that ended up becoming losses that they could very well, regret as we go in on such a short schedule and with such a compressed schedule.
Yeah, what concerns me, Anthony, is when you look back at these games, the Flyers versus the Bruins, Caps, Islanders, and the Pens are 6-6-2.
Yes.
And the Flyers are really beating up with the Devils, the Rangers, and the Sabres 6-1-1. So that kind of harkens back to what Dan was talking about. Or have we really gotten out of the bubble? They play better than they did in the bubble, no doubt about it. But it's a little concerning. It's like, when does this thing get going? I mean, Dave Scott brought Chuck Fletcher in essentially to kind of move this thing forward. And we like some of the moves that were made last year. It worked out for the most part with Hayes, Niskanen, and Braun to a lesser degree, but still helped on the PK. Now what? I understand there's a crunch with the cap and everything. It's just like, how long are you going to get good years out of some of these people? I mean, with JVR, who's really just been a revelation this year. You're
getting a remarkably good year out of you for the most part. This is, one of JVR's, certainly one of the best years, certainly something I don't think any of us expected. I don't know, maybe sort of discussions of before the season started about, hey, maybe JVR should be at, a Seattle target. And maybe he was like, well, let's make that a little bit more difficult for you guys. But again, I'd also say maybe it's also JVR also. I mean, he already played in Toronto and I think was already kind of maturing there. But I think he came back to Philly sort of was still kind of feeling his way. And now he's having a good year. Is this year going to be an outlier compared to the rest of his years? Something we're going to have to see. But he could also just be, again, a veteran player who is kind of figured it out altogether, and it's just happened at this point of his life. So, give him a lot of credit in that regard. But yeah, you've got this window. You've got still this window. If you are going to take advantage of it, you're going to have to make a move. And again, these are discussions that I've had fairly extensively with a lot of people. Certainly Russ Cohen, my co-host, and I on Off the Post Radio have had these discussions on. We both are in agreement, obviously, that the blue line, at the end of the day, if I'm looking at personnel-wise, that's the area that concerns me the most. I think Philly's forward depth is, at least on paper, good. But could there be some shake? Again, could you shake up a little something there in order to improve another area? Sure. And then and potentially still fill in parts as you go along with maybe veterans during the deadline, especially if you got, again, prospects in system who are coming. Maybe you're inclined to move off of Nolan Patrick. Maybe you do look at moving off a Morgan Frost, that's what Nashville is looking for in a trade. If they are looking at if they are looking to move Ekholm off.
Yeah, and they're certainly looking to get rid of one of Johansson or Duchesne somehow in their what seems to be a rebuild situation there.
And that's going to be tough. That's going to be a real tough spot because, again,
good luck. Right?
Yeah, Johansson. It's going to be a tough spot there for Nashville with both of those players. And again, it's going to be they are where they are. Nashville. The window is has closed on that team. But there's opportunities there, certainly. And again, if a guy like Ekholm is available, which has been reported that he potentially will be, again, Poyle's going to wait. He's going to wait. And he's going to wait. And he's going to wait until we get close to the hour, and then he's going to make the move. As much as you want Chuck Fletcher to make the trade, he may have an offer out. He very well could have the offer out there, and Poyle's just going to be like, okay, I'm going to file that away, and we're going to wait for a little bit here. And then if he's going to, obviously, as a good GM is going to do, especially if his team is struggling, as Poyle's team is, he's got all the time in the world to kind of wait here to see what the deal potentially might be. Philly gets desperate. They throw more in. Other teams do. You wait and see, and you maximize the asset that you have. So I always have that in the back of my mind, like the GM's got to make the move down. The GM move has to make the move now. You offer very well. There very well could be an offer in at this point, and it's just the other team wants to wait on it.
So can I ask a question here,
Yeah.
Isaiah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I understand all that. The trade deadline is what, April 12th?
Mm-hmm.
Right about, yeah.
Okay. So do we think that the players are going to have to quarantine after they're traded?
Not only ones that I think you have to worry about quarantining are the ones who would have to be coming out. If you are, the more the concern is, I think, for the teams up in Canada.
Yeah, Canada. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the Canadian situation. So if you were to make a trade, and that's the thing. That's the one thing where we kind of have an artificial deadline here, in that I think for some teams in Canada, they're going to be starting to make their moves early with the knowledge of having that 14-day quarantine still being in place. You acquire a player. That's why, Winnipeg ended up making and pulling the trigger as soon as they did early in the season, because they knew they weren't going to have Dubois for a bit. And then, of course, he got hurt. But
right.
The considerations that you make, especially if you're looking to make a deal with a Canadian player, a team on a Canadian team coming in and acquiring a player from a Canadian team. So that's one of the things to look at there.
Here's my question on this one.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still about 20 games left before the trade deadline,
mm-hmm.
which is a lot of the rest of the season. So the trade deadline is going to come, and after that, there's only going to be about 15 games left in the season, right?
Yes.
So let's just say that between now and the trade deadline, the Flyers don't do that well, and they fall, somewhat out of the playoff race. Now their interest in trading from Matthias Ekholm goes way down. So isn't there also some risk on David Poyle's side that, hey, I've got a really good offer out there. If I don't make it and these teams fall off a little bit, they might not want Matthias Ekholm so bad. So it can backfire. And,
it can, but again, it comes back from the point of view of, again, the timing of the situation has to be lined up for both the team and the teams and the players, obviously, in question. So you have to get a good feel for that. And I'm not saying, again, that Poyle will wait all the way to the trade deadline. He may decide to move off if he feels he's going to get maximum of what he could possibly get for him, and it happens to be from Philadelphia. Then he can also make that call to Chuck Fletcher and say, hey, if you add a little more into this deal, I think I'm ready to make. And you're in a spot here defensively. These are the constant conversations that go back and forth between general managers. And it's all about feel and timing. And it's good. But again, at the end of the day, Poyle has the asset. If Philadelphia's interest goes down, well, Poyle could look at it and say, well, okay, there's other teams. Boston, they're right in the middle of it. They're going to be, their blue line is okay, but they're looking to, try to maximize their window with the veteran players that they have in Marchand, Bergeron, and of course Pasternak. And they did let go of Zdeno Chara. And blue line wise, as much as the Bruins look like world beaters against the Flyers, they've also they've also struggled of late, and that's also a conversation that people in Boston have had about the thinness, what the relative thinness of their blue line. So Philly's in that's in that circumstance, you're going to have Dave Poyle playing one against the other, and it's not just them. Pittsburgh now feels like that they're now in the race. their blue lines certainly on the thin enough so that they're having Mark Friedman out there on regular shifts, as and playing pretty not bad. He didn't play too bad obviously in the few games that he's had already. But again, they have an asset that for a lot of teams that are in contention that they want, and Coyle knows it. He's going to leverage that as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing the Flyers have, unlike most of the teams that are vying for the services of somebody like Matthias Ekholm, they probably have more assets and a greater ability to overpay than anybody. It just depends.
And they might, and the other thing is, they may decide, they look at Ekholm and they say, we're focused so much on Ekholm because he's the top target. May not necessarily be. Maybe they decide on, as I said, David Savard. Maybe they decide on a Jason. Maybe, you could talk to Arizona about DeMero, in this circumstance. There's other potential areas that they could pivot to. Savard certainly one I have definite interest in if you aren't going after Ekholm. But, then after that, I think some of the pickings for the blue line, for how you would view them as an upgrade, start to dip off a bit. And then and then we'd have to see where they would go from there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like, I'm not worried. We talked a lot in other shows about the expansion protection schemes, whether 7-3-1, 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, 1 goalie, or 8 skaters and 1 goalie. And for me, it's like, this is such a need for them. I mean, Niskanen was such a difference maker for them. And if they have an opportunity to go get the guy, and it's a big if here, can Ekholm be that guy playing on his off wing or offside, his right side, then that's a need this team absolutely has to fill. And we should go get him. Don't worry about protection schemes. Look, you can always throw another asset to Seattle if they say, hey, we're going to take Ekholm. No, we'll give you, prospect X if need be. I mean, and don't forget, the other thing is that coming off a good season, JVR, I still think is going to be unprotected. Jake, Ghost, Haig. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm not worried about, you know what I'm saying? I'm not worried so much about the expansion now because they got to fill this need. And, it is convenient that Savard is out there and he defensively is very similar to Ekholm. But Ekholm adds more on the offensive side of the game, is a little bit more well-rounded in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say overall, I think if I think he, with the exception obviously of the hand, obviously the lefty versus righty, and where Savard, I think Ekholm's overall game is a little step beyond Savard's, but I'm not going to say it's a huge. If you decided to go after Savard, that's going to be a major drop of quality. I think you're still going to be at it. I still think Savard is overall, it would be an upgrade on anything that you currently have right now, and as your options right now in your top four, in the top 4.
Right. Yes.
But I do believe in the moment right now. You look at the expansion. Everybody's concerned about expansion and focused in on that. You do have to you do need to do something, and I do wonder in some ways. You do sometimes wonder, and again, it's part of the business as well. But I'm sure, as the team is sort of slipping a little bit, I do wonder in some circumstances, again, if, some of the players look around the room and are like, okay, who's going to be here and who's not going to be here when, if Chuck decides to pull the trigger. But that's part of the business. And that requires somebody who's currently on the roster heading off. Well, that's the way it goes. You got to improve your play now, don't you?
Absolutely. Anthony, we don't want to keep you all night, but I wanted to get Shep with one last question, if it's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a quick one. Like you just mentioned, Isaiah brought up a good point. Like, how likely, even if you took, like, let's say Savard, because I think it's the better fit, right-handed, and if they're that close, then it's a no-brainer. You go with the natural side. How realistic is your thinking of, like, if you're going to protect somebody at the draft, I wouldn't really worry about that fourth defenseman when you have like you said, JVR having such a great year, Ghost and Voracek. I think that they'd be like more likely candidates to be selected by Seattle just based on their upside of history, as opposed to somebody who was picked up at the trade deadline.
Possible, but again, you also have to also have an idea and a grip on what is Seattle focused in on as a team? What kind of identity are they looking to shape early on? I don't think you bring in some of the heavy hitters, and certainly in the analytics community that they brought in. They're gonna go in directions that may be along the lines of what you're thinking, or may not be in this circumstance. It comes down to how they sort of want to shape their roster. Certainly early on, they may target certain players that you don't necessarily expect them to. So these are the things again that you have to kind of take a look at in getting a bearing on that team, because I do think, again, Francis obviously being in charge, but I do think that their department, their analytics department, has a really good chance of, kind of shaping the identity of what that team is going to be going forward. Much like at the end of the day, Vegas was able to leverage incredibly well as well. They also have Vegas has a very good analytics department as well. But Seattle, especially seems to have focused in on that area. And again, we may be looking at certain things from who they might take off of the Flyers roster, and they may go after somebody else that you didn't even account for. So we're going to see where that goes.
Great. And thanks so much for doing this. Where can people find you on social media and on your podcast?
So my own media feed, obviously on Twitter, is at Anthony Mingioni, ANTHONYMINGIONI. No underscores, just my name, first and last name together. That's on Twitter. Our radio for the podcast, Off the Post Radio. Also, same thing, at Off the Post Radio, no underscores. And of course, we're on the Full Press radio network, and we're sponsored obviously by Upper Deck Sports as well now. So those would be two of the places, certainly on social. And you can find obviously my Instagram as well, same thing, with just my name on it as well. So magazine wise, once we get back in full print again, right now with the rinks being closed, and putting up some things up online with Center Ice Philly, but the mag hopefully will be coming back soon, potentially by the playoffs. We're going to see if things obviously are moving in the right direction in terms of the rinks reopening. So, but yeah, Center Ice Philly magazine when the rinks are open.
Yeah, super. So stretch out, heal up. Anthony's playing that tonight.
Gonna go do that now.
Okay. Anthony, thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
Right.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care.
Dan.
Okay, so, well, lot to go through there, and we didn't really even get into some of the other players and the other options that the Flyers could look at. Dan, just your overall impressions since you joined us late. We just went through the games and talked about the Meltzer tweet and how the Flyers were during the first 10 games, and how over this last 12 games, 5-5-2, how some of the numbers stacked up. And we just saw what stood out most glaringly were the special teams. And how do we address that, and how do we improve that? And that's kind of where we took off from.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you can probably, hear the frustration in my voice. I mean, I've seen this team build up the prospect pool, and now, to me, this was finally the year where everything was going to come together, right? Where, Myers and/or Sanheim were going to take these big steps forward. Like I said, we've gotten it from Farabee. We've gotten steps back from some other guys, and, was kind of hoping that Nolan Patrick might take the next step, and Lindblom, both those guys. I think, we should be being patient with them based on the injuries and health situations that are coming back from, but it's not helping out that neither guy has really been producing all that much. Lindblom has been, he's been producing a little bit more recently, but I think it's just more frustration of, okay, we're now getting to the point where there's probably only so much more juice that we can squeeze out of some of our veterans in the coming years. And it's kind of go time right now for this team. And look, Chuck Fletcher, when he came in, he absolutely showed a bias for action. He traded away a draft pick just to get the right to negotiate with Kevin Hayes, who was an unrestricted free agent. That took some real balls on his part. Right away, he went out and he traded for Niskanen and he traded for Braun. And these were, he clearly is a man of action. When he knows what he wants, he goes out and gets it. So that leads me to believe that he is doing everything he can right now to figure out a way to help this team. He hasn't done it yet, though. So, I'm not expecting some great breakthrough where we're going to see this team reel off 5 or 10 straight wins. I don't think the situation on defense is going to magically improve leaps and bounds. I don't think that Nolan Patrick, Oscar Lindblom, Travis Konechny, I don't think these guys are magically going to turn into huge stars. So for me, it's just a frustration of I'd like to take advantage of the incredible amount of assets we have and make a move. And I understand it's very hard in the current salary cap environment to do that. But I'm hoping they can, because I'm kind of at the point where, I'm just sort of sick of watching the same old crap every night.
I agree. Chef, I'm going to go to you in a second. Just one question. If they said no to Forsberg, but said yes to Victor Arvidsson, would that still interest you, even if it was a less compensation going back to Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is shaking it up front. Like the Flyers have great depth at the forward position. So it's not as much about it's not much about I don't like the forward group right now, although I do think we need a little bit more of an edge, which is what I like about Philip Forsberg. He's kind of plays with a really nasty edge. But yeah, I think shaking up the forward group a little bit, I think would help also. Yeah.
Chef?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the trade that Dan had put on Twitter because I wanted to clarify. It's not that I wouldn't do the trade. I mean, it wasn't you had Jay O'Brien instead of somebody else.
Right.
You mentioned, yeah. So you had Jake, Nolan Patrick, a first round pick, Zamula, O'Brien, and Allison going to the Predators for Ekholm and Forsberg. It's not that I wouldn't do that. I felt like it was slightly overpaying. I would have pulled out like Zamula and maybe knocked the first down to a second. And the only reason I said that is because after our show with DB last week, I felt that, and he had a point, like the prices are going down for everything. And the team trading away that needs that big guy, they're the ones that are usually end up the losers in these trades. And I just thought, oh, okay. But to your point, you're right. It needs to be shaken up. And I would still, if that's the case, I would offer the first thing. They're like, nah, we want Zamula. And you know what? Make it a first and make it like, Allison O'Brien. You could keep, whatever. I don't care. At that point, you're right. I'm doing a trade because I want to see some kind of shakeup because obviously, like you were saying before, does sitting a player in this day and age work anymore? I don't know if it does. And I don't think it did when EV did it this past couple of weeks here. I just think that you need some kind of shakeup. People need to know that a change of scenery could be possibly coming. And I think that might be the wake-up call.
Well, yeah, there's also the fact, and we've talked about this before, is I'm not crazy about the mix of players. I need more shoot-first players. Mm-hmm. They're so deferential. They're always passing. Even at 2-0, where TK got a goal, I was holding my breath. They're going to screw this up. I mean, what is it? Why can't someone just, hey, there's my shot. I'm going to take it because that's what I do. They need that player. They need a guy who, like Brendan Tanev, when he was out there with the Penguins, I said he's more aggressive than anybody that I've seen in a Flyer uniform in years. Even more so than who was the guy they lost to Arizona? Can't think of his name. Pitlick. I mean, yeah, I said we need more of that jam. And it's so funny. I saw a trade rumor today that the Penguins are looking to add more muscle. And so if the Penguins are trying to add more muscle, what the heck are the Flyers trying to do? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you say that, like the 2-0, because ironically, the one Flyer that has shown like an improvement, and Dan's mentioned it a couple of times, is Farabee. And here he was on a breakaway and he passed it. Like, he was a step ahead of everybody, and yet he still passed it. I think that's
the culture.
That's true too.
It's a culture. It's a culture of deference and making pretty plays that end up, in going the other way, and instead of in the back of the opponent's net. I think the Knicks. I never liked the Knicks. I don't want to go on and on about it. I'm in agreement with you, Dan, and Chef. It sounds like you feel the same way. It is time for a change. Look, Hextall took over when 2014. Look, that's an eternity in professional sports. And like you said, this moment is not going to be there possibly next year. They're going to have a lot of options after expansion, but by then you might not have the same player. And then they have to make a decision about whether they want to pay Couturier and start a new era. Is G going to sign a 1 or 2 year deal? What happens to Voracek? I mean,
look, part of the reason that you stockpile assets is so that you can move some of them to try and win. And so, I've come to peace with the fact that we're, putting Egor, Chef, you mentioned you do that trade if you take Zamula in the first round pick out, but the whole point is that they won't make a trade like that unless you have a top tier prospect in there, like Zamula. Now, look, I don't think that a trade like that is going to happen. I was just kind of putting that out there because I'm spitballing, and I'd love to get Forsberg on the team, but you're going to have to give up something good. One interesting thing is, Dennis Bernstein was on the show last week, and he'd mentioned that he thought that the asking price for Ekholm was 2 second-round picks. I mean, at this point, do we just think that he was just wrong? Because it sounds like everyone else seems to think that it's a lot more than that.
You don't know. You don't know until a deal goes down.
Yeah.
You don't know.
It's funny.
We've been surprised at some of the prices at trade deadline because you have these GMs, they thought they had it, like Anthony was referring to. They're trying to build the leverage and play these teams against each other, and then they wait too long and they miss the moment. And I'm trying to think of some trades that went down last year and where you're thinking to yourself, is that all that player got? So we won't know. Yeah, Chef?
Yeah, I was just thinking too, like, if you're looking for that shoot first person later, then sub out somebody else for Wade Allison, because he seems like that guy is the only one in our system that seems to have that mentality, and I don't want to lose that then.
I love that kid, okay, but
joke,
he can't stay healthy. I cross my fingers that one day we'll see him in a Flyers uniform, but if it's to that point where we could get a real upgrade, no one is untouchable for me. No one.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to win. It's time. There have been people who were very, skeptical about Hextall's approach, even in the thick of it, when it looked like he was setting up all these protocols for drafting and developing, and he had, there was a sequence to it, and there was a rhyme and reason, and it was going to end in a logical way where it was go time, as he put it. When he was, after he was fired, and he was covering his backside in that press conference. Well, it wasn't go time. Well, it is now. It certainly is now. Had Ron stayed here, it would have been. So why not now? When you brought in, like Dave Scott said, and Dan, I think you referred to earlier, a bias for action. I don't want to hear excuses anymore. This team is having trouble against better teams. They're struggling on special teams. They're not as good in many ways because they lost Niskanen. And like you said, the only player who's really taken that step forward, that Mike Richards in 2008 kind of step forward, is Joel Farabee. So.
Yep, he's been sensational. I hope that they can make a move soon, because like I said, you want to wait till the trade deadline. That's 20 games from now.
Yeah.
There's only going to be 13 games left after that. So I think I'd be trying to, if you have to make an overpay now, I would do it to try and get what you want. And I'm prepared to deal with the fact that, some of these prospects we may trade away might be really good a few years down the line. But otherwise, this team cannot win a cup as constructed this season unless you make changes.
Yeah, no way. No way. And I'm not afraid of jumping the market or setting the market. Who cares? There was a couple extra years when it wasn't a time to go. You spent acquiring assets.
Yes.
So if you expend a few of them after a certain amount of time, well, good. That's time well spent. It's time to put this thing together. Because I am just really tired, like I said earlier. Joel Farabee, let's just drill down on what he's doing. 21 games, 11 goals. Is that tied for the lead in the league? 9 assists, 20 points.
Question.
Let me check that.
I'm not sure.
No, tied for the lead in the league? There's no way.
No way? Thought he was.
For what? What do you mean?
Just goals. That's all. I thought
no, because I saw. No, definitely not. There was a player I saw who had 13 goals.
Okay.
Who I was like, really? Oh, I think who has 13 goals is Vinny Trocheck. I was like, really? Vinny Trocheck has 13 goals?
Oh yeah, I'm totally wrong. Okay, I'll just since I'm totally wrong, I better.
Austin Matthews has 18.
Oh, it's 18.
Goals.
Tyler Toffoli with 15. McDavid 15. DeBrincat 14. Kreider 13. Trocheck 13. Brock Besser, a player I'd love to have, 13. Again, you get on his stick, it's going toward the net. Pavelski with a career renaissance continuing in Dallas with 12.
God,
Pacioretty with 12. Alex Tuck, 12. Marchand. Logan Couture still going from that 07 draft. Rantanen, Dustin Brown, Anders Lee, all those guys have 12. And then 16th place, Stamkos, Farabee, Niederreiter, a whole bunch of guys like Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Ehlers, Braden Schenner, old friend. So I guess that trade at least evened itself out, right? Patrick Kane, who's got 27 assists for 38 points. Goudreau, Horvat, and then I'll just leave it there. And Pasternak would probably be in front if he had not had all that time off because he's amazing. I think he's the best pure scorer in the league, David Pasternak.
Hands down.
Well, I mean, McDavid gives him a run.
It's funny. You've been talking. I remember when Brock Besser first came up, you were talking about him. You really were like, if Flyers could somehow get them, you were talking about that. And I'll never forget that. And ever since then, I've kept my eye on him. And he could be something special down the road, too.
He's a line A light. His game's probably a little more well-rounded. He's not quite as prolific and probably won't be up there scoring quite as much over the course of his career, but he's close enough for me. And he's one of those players that you look for in the power play. And at least if he's not scoring, the other team has to worry about him, and it opens up things for other players. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You don't get the bullshit associated with him, too. He just goes out and plays his shifts.
Yeah. There are a lot of players. There's like developing baggage. And I look at players like Patrick and Konechny. Some players that seem like it's probably due to maturity or lack of maturity, what have you, or just they're different people. And I think it speaks to the mix of this team and the way that the organization has settled for just rolling out a lot of the same guy within a relative range. It's like the same player on the first three lines of just varying degrees of skill. That's why they mix them up so much. And you kind of like, it's rearranging the deck chairs on a Titanic. It's a lot of nice players, but they're not winning anything. And I feel like at this point we're repeating ourselves. Dan, what do you say?
There's not much more to say, right? I mean, it's got to do something. I mean, hopefully. Okay, imagine if this team loses to the Sabres next?
They got next. Going forward, they got Buffalo, and then they got to play Capitals on Thursday and Saturday, a day off, and then they're in New York for 2 versus the Rangers, and then back to back on Wednesday with the Rangers, and then they got to go play the Islanders on Thursday and again on Saturday. So
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what makes it even more important to try and make a deal soon, because, man, things can really snowball out of control. And look, maybe they'll turn it around and they'll start winning a bunch of games in a row. But I'm concerned that things are going to really snowball negatively here in the next few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's a question, Dan. The Capitals game is Washington. Do you know if Washington's are they allowing fans down there yet?
I don't think that they've got fans back yet for the Caps games. I don't believe. Yeah, I live down here. I haven't seen anything on it, but I could be wrong. But I don't think that they are allowing. Let's take a look here at the.
I think if they climb over the razor wire at the Capitol, maybe they can get in.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they've had any fans at any of the Caps games yet. So no, not yet.
No, we got. We can't leave tonight without talking about Taryn Hatcher's granny glasses last night. You notice them? I thought she stole them from Irene Ryan from the set of Beverly Hillbillies.
I thought it was laughing, but it was funny. I didn't notice it until you said something. I went back because I was watching, but I was doing other things while I was watching too. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is when you said that, I started laughing.
Yeah, I mean, she did an ad for the Club Box suites. I think she was wearing different glasses, and they look fine. She's very attractive. I called her an 11 in an earlier episode, but the glasses just don't work for me. Just maybe I will get back to her somehow. But,
oh, okay, yeah, sure. She's worried about that. Sitting there, I wonder what Isaiah said today about my glasses.
Well, she was. I mean, apparently, what Dan the Flyer fan said way back last year. Registered.
You never know who's listening.
Yeah, Dan catches a lot of crap. I tell you, he gets a bad rap. So one last thing, we talked about the schedule ahead. I wanted to just go back real fast with Savard and Ekholm, and I'd like to. Let me see. I had a tableau here, and it's from Top Down Hockey. And one of the things it looked at was this RAPM, regularized, adjusted, plus minus. Takes your Corsi, expected goals, and whatever you think of that. And it runs it through a bootstrapping exercise where they take a lot of different averages to try and take out biases. It gets real deep into advanced numbers. But what the upshot of it is that Matthias Ekholm appears to be, over a recent period of time, a definite improvement offensively compared to somebody like Savard. Defensively, Savard actually graded out a little higher. And even though they're both better than average in terms of net impact, it appears that Matthias Ekholm has a greater value, at least from that particular standpoint, which tries to take a multifactorial analytic approach. So I thought I'd throw that in there. And for did that mean anything to anybody? I don't know.
Yeah, I saw it, and I thought it was interesting, and it kind of just supports what I was thinking when we were talking about the trade talk, and I think I would go more for Savard then, because if that's my underlying factor, I want more help on the D. I want a stronger D man, and if his natural side is the right side. We don't know how bad a hit Ekholm would take playing on his off wing. So I just think, I guess the plus side for me would be I see too many mitigating factors now to make me think that it's probably better in the long run if you took somebody who was natural on his side and slightly better on the D, and that's what we need. I'm just thinking of more need than anything else now.
Yeah, well, for me, my plan is Savard's going to be a free agent, going to be out in the market next year. I'm ready to move on from Haig, Ghost, Gustafsson. Let's go after Savard in the offseason. Let's go grab Matthias Ekholm and really start upgrading this defense. But that's just me.
Let's trade for both of them.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, something's got to change. because they talk about in the past like connecting and Patrick, I kind of called out a little bit. And when they're not playing well, they're more perimeter players. They don't like going to the dirty areas. Well, guess what? Against the Flyers, those areas aren't that dirty. And that's why other teams are usually getting, the better of the expected goal metric in terms of the quality of chances. Yeah, you're not going to get any fight here. Hey, listen, before we go, just want to mention that the O&B Puckcast is brought to you also by Jim's South Street. They're right on 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. Some of the finest steaks and hoagies in the tradition that goes back 4 decades. Just really great stuff, with or without. It doesn't matter. And listen, if you live down near there, you can use DoorDash in case you can't make it over to 400 South Street and get some of the best cheesesteaks that you'll ever want. Got to be on your bucket list. Go to Jim's South Street, right on 400 South Street in Philadelphia. And gents, with that, I'm going to wrap it right there. Dan, where can people catch you on social media? And if you have a final statement, be sure to bring that across too.
My final statement is whenever we do this show, it's right before I eat dinner and I'm so hungry. You always mention Jim's Steaks. And now the last few times we've done the show, I'm like, I would do anything to be able to get a Jim's Steaks delivered to my door. You're killing me with the Jim's Steaks. It's like my favorite thing in Philly. I'm actually probably coming up there this weekend to see the folks. I don't know if I'll make it down there, but oh man, I might have to now. So, and my favorite place to get a cheesesteak. But anyway, you can find me on Twitter at dsilver88 and see my opinions there. Argue with me, whatever you want, and let's hope we can beat the Sabres.
Oh God, you imagine this town? It would almost be fun, but I don't want to lose to the Sabres, Chef.
Yeah, I agree with you there too. But you can find me at Chef de Left B on Twitter. And Dan, next time I go visit my girls down there, I will personally stop at Jim's and get you one and bring it down.
I love it.
I will. And I'll tell you when I'm coming. We'll do it all. We'll make a big deal about it. Take some pictures, put it on Twitter, let everybody happy.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I was bad with my diet this week, so I have to go up and have tuna. Oh, God. So just don't feel too bad. Anyway, I'm Isaiah. You can follow me at Isaiah, ISAIAH _520 at Isaiah. Don't forget the underscore 520. And of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter. We have a Facebook page. You can follow us on YouTube. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and that notification bell. And if you could subscribe on whatever platform, particularly Apple Podcasts, the subscriptions are important. They move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. And hey, while you're there, give us a rating. If you could write a review, we'll read it online. We appreciate it, and it helps us out for sure. So until next week, everybody, take care.